introduce myself. I'm Esther Rosenberg, and I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of the Eastside Art Society. And we produce what is now the 25th annual Eastside Culture Crawl. And I'd like to acknowledge that we are living and working on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, on whose land we work and live on. I'd also would like to introduce Carlyn Yandle. And Carlyn Yandle is back with us for a second year in a row. She does these amazing curated talks and is a fantastic moderator. So we're pleased to have her back this year. Carlyn Yandle's art practice draws on her previous career as a print journalist to engage community through simple handmaking methods and found manufactured materials. Her works include public art installations, painting, fiber arts, and sculpture. She also writes on the creative process, and you can find those works at carlynyandle.com. And so I'll throw it over to you, Carlyn, to do your magic.
No pressure. Thanks, Esther. Again, it's really great to be back here for this Talking Art series. It's a fantastic format, and the Zoom is working, so it's a nice way to fill out the crawl schedule. This year's theme for all three talks to review is exploration toward the project of art making. So if you were lucky enough to catch last night's talk, we dug deep into three crawl artists' practice that are being propelled by different kinds of research. And in a way, tonight is an extension of that research through the material itself. So material research and material engagement. And I'm really excited to dig into that with these three very differing practices, Ed Hunt, Shary Bartlett, and Robert Morris. So we'll see tonight that material and matter matters in a big way for these artists' very distinct practices. So I'm going to introduce all three of you and just tell me if I've gone wrong, because I pull things from different sources, and sometimes it doesn't jive. I'll start with Ed Hunt. Emerging from lockdown for Ed has meant exploring his new-ish home in the form of painting from around Vancouver and the suburbs. His practice typically includes drawing and painting outside and canoeing and backpacking to make art and story. And in this past pandemic year, he has spent most of last summer in the city of Vancouver outside and painting. His work grapples with the physical environment, from complicated vistas down to the detritus, the rusty bits and pieces that speak, in his words, to lock down, maybe even break down. What do you think?
Oh, breakdown. It sounds pretty serious, Carlyn.
I
like it. It sounds good.
Your
stuff's really good.
We're going to get into it, but some of your stuff is like richly a little bit dark, and that's important. So we're going to get into some of that stuff too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, moving on. Shary Bartlett is an artist and fine arts instructor. Her mixed media body of work includes encaustic, acrylic, fiber arts, prints, sculptural assemblage, collage, and altered photographs. She's been a longtime fine arts instructor at colleges and universities such as Capilano University, Red Deer College, and Langara, and leads international mixed media workshops and online masterclasses. Shary's work is held in public and private collections in Canada and the US, and has been included in numerous international art exhibitions. She teaches art internationally, and her encaustic work and techniques are featured in books on the subject. Oh my goodness. Finally, we have Robert Morris. Robert teaches art photography and animation at a Lower Mainland high school, and before that, he spent 25 years teaching traditional Arctic kayak building in his business at Brewery Creek Small Boat Shop, and wrote the illustrated instructional book, Building Skin-on Frame Boats. And I also have here, Building Boats of Skin and Bones. Is that accurate, Robert? Oh, not hearing Robert. Come on in. Hi.
I'm sorry,
Oh,
my
this is
connection dropped and it reconnected and muted.
glad
That was
you're
the
able to
original
join us.
title. Sorry, that was the original title, but the publisher thought it was too frightening.
Okay.
And changed it.
Okay. He's just completed his Master's of Fine Arts at Emily Carr University this summer. I could start anywhere because I'm just really interested in hearing all of your practices, but maybe we could start with Shary, just because your work in Encaustic is you have this long enduring relationship with Encaustic itself as a material. And maybe you could speak to a little bit of why that. I mean, there's actually acrylic mediums that kind of have the same effect as Encaustic. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your intense relationship with the Encaustic process and that material.
Intense. Wow, we've got intense and dark. Wow, what a talk this is going to be. Sure, I'd love to. Thank you very much for inviting me, by the way. It's a pleasure to be here. Encaustic, I just thought I would explain a little bit about what it is, because it's a word that a lot of people don't know. And encaustic it comes from a Greek word, encaustikos, which means to burn in. And encaustic is a combination, the medium that we use is a combination of beeswax and resin from trees. So it's like sap almost. So we combine those two things together. So we're kind of like alchemists working with these two materials, and then add pigment to it. And of course it has to be heated up. And in ancient times, back in Greek and Egyptian times, it had to be heated on embers. But now, of course, we have plug-in machines that work. But we mix pigment in there. And so we heat up the material, the encaustic medium, and then apply it with a brush or a hot tool or something to whatever surface, either a sculptural surface or a painting or whatever. But encaustic kind of has a mind of its own, and it's not like acrylic. So I think that's really interesting, Carlyn, that you made that connection, because you can combine acrylic medium to look a bit like encaustic, but to me, it has a kind of plasticky look to it. And encaustic has this kind of translucence, and it has this layering effect. You can put, it has to be attached every layer. Oh, there's a piece. Every layer of the wax has to be heated and attached to the next one. So you can bury material into the wax, almost like a geological survey or something of geological layers of earth. And so it has this kind of living energy to it for me. And it also behaves the way it would like. So we have to use a torch to layer these little sections of wax, one on top of another, and these different textural layers. So each one has to be heated with a torch. So if you overheat it, it just decides it's going to start running off the side, or it'll blow into different shapes. And that's part of the magic of it. But you have to kind of, as an artist, we kind of have to work in cooperation with it, because it's this living material that's created by bees and by trees. And so it really lends itself to natural subject matter as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, when you're speaking, I'm thinking a lot about American political theorist, philosopher Jane Bennett, and talking about, and Robert, you just got out of your MFA, so you've probably come across her, but this idea of material having its own energy. You talked about the living energy in that material. And I think that's a theme that we're going to see today, that whether it's a really luscious, friendly material or something really toxic, it has a big energy. And I think that's probably something that all three of you have in common, is this really kind of a deep connection with something that turns from, that is on the face of it inanimate, but you can sort of animate it through your relationship with it. Does that sound a little esoteric? I hope not.
No, that's great. And I think also, hopefully, that energy communicates with the viewer as well. And they take that that impression and add their own meaning into it and pick up on that energy.
And is it always like a lovely experience with the medium, or is there sometimes
Always.
when you're
Art is always lovely, isn't it? We never have mistakes. Nothing ever goes wrong.
I mean, you got your fire gun and your irons and your pour overs, and
learn to be very careful. Of course, there's lots of things that go wrong. But as I work more with the material, and the longer I am an artist, the more I warm to those. Some people call them happy accidents, or just that collaboration that I have with that living material. And things don't always work out the way I want them to, but they often work out the way they should. So, and certainly there's plenty of artwork that won't be making it into the crawl this year because it just isn't quite there yet.
Right. And what I should mention this off the top, that all three of you have work that we might not be referring to necessarily in this talk. We're talking about your engagement with materials. So it might not be exactly what is seen in your studios when you open them up. All three of you are opening your studios up, correct?
Yeah.
I'm
Robert?
not opening my studio, but I will be at Maker Lab, and I've seized the loading bay.
You've seized
So
it.
it's not where I work, which is more like a closet, but it's a
Okay.
space.
You've commandeered it.
Yes.
Excellent. I'm just getting back, Shary, to the material. I'm interested in, maybe we could look at a few of your examples of some of your work now to see some of the way that you're pushing the physical limits of the material, because you're not just working flat.
No, I'm not. That piece that's great. That's a great example. That these pieces are made of you're using alcohol ink. So alcohol ink is often used on Yupo paper, but I'm using it on wax. So what happens is that when the wax gets heated, the alcohol ink kind of breaks into these cell-like structures, which are really fascinating to me because they kind of take on these biomorphic shapes, and it's as if there's this chemical process happening on the surface of the wax. And then what I love to do is add a textural layer. So you can see on the left there that I've added layers upon layers of wax on top of that with a tiny stylus that's kind of like a fountain pen that I fill with wax, so that I can build up the layers. And I like to think of it as kind of like earth and air and fire and water all happening on the surface of that painting. So I've got the air, of course, with the bees, and the fire that comes from heating the wax, and the liquid, the water element being the inks, and the earth elements being the pigments that are being used. So I do a lot of work. I've done a lot of work over the last few years using alcohol inks and encaustic. I have some other photographs there. There's actually one, I think, of this painting that's behind me that's kind of orangey flowers. That one is looking at the commercial flower industry. And so I'm looking at how pesticides are being used on the growing of commercial flowers, and how we don't take into account often when we put those beautiful flowers up onto the table, how there's all of these environmental effects, both for the people that are using the pesticides, and also, I'll talk about that one too. People that are using the pesticides, of course, a really devastating effect on the bees, and the production of honey and beeswax as well. So that piece is all about the commercial flower industry, and I'm actually using synthetic material because I wanted to use that material not being something natural, but talking about how unnatural this commercial flower industry is. I'll talk about this piece. This is similar to a similar installation to the piece that's now on at the Alternative Creations Gallery on Venables. That's part of the Culture Crawl's multi-venue event called Surfacing of different artists who are involved in the Culture Crawl that are doing work, that's come out of the last year. Anybody know what these are? Do you recognize what these are made of?
Face masks.
Face masks, yeah. So these are made of surgical face masks that I've formed into these lotus flowers, and they're kind of inspired by the Buddhist symbol of the lotus, which is a beautiful symbol of growth and rebirth, but it grows out of the mud. And I thought it was a really powerful symbol coming out of, or we're still in this whole pandemic, but sort of growing out of this pandemic experience, how we've been able to, in some ways, form it into something beautiful. However, the material that I've used is something that's very symbolic of hiding behind these masks of fear, of illness and death. And it has negative associations, but by combining it with wax, it turns into something really beautiful and hopeful, I hope. And then I'll just talk about one other piece because I want to hear from the other artists too. But there's another piece there that is some very large mussel shells that are built out of Tyvek. And Tyvek, you probably know, is that building material. There's a picture on the beach, there we go, of these oversized mussel shells. And Tyvek is a building envelope material that keeps the rain out, but it allows the moisture from our breath and from living to escape outside of the house. So I used it to create these really huge shells to symbolize protection and home, and also draw attention to these mussel shells that you can see, in the beach there, these tiny mussel shells that we know so well being in Vancouver, and that they're so ubiquitous, but they're so beautiful. We don't pay attention to them. And so again, trying to bring our attention to nature and beauty using a variety of materials. And I tell you, this one was a hard one to learn how to manipulate and add wax to. But when one works with Encaustic, there's this temptation to dip everything in wax. I have some pictures there of seaweed and all kinds of things. So
a lot of exploration.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely, I can see you pushing the physical limits of material. And there's another one there. And at that large scale, muscle at a large scale, it's a little bit foreboding as well. To my mind, it's like the prehistoric muscle.
Hey, that's a great association. I never thought of that.
So yeah, when you change the scale, you can get a new read. Yeah, that's interesting. Robert, maybe we could talk a little bit about that idea of pushing the physical limits of material, because you're very skilled at with wood, I would say. I mean, why would you at this point decide to move out of a really successful skill, a really highly skill set in making boats, to move into the abstract? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Personally, it's because I have a low threshold of boredom. I'm always looking for something new. I'm always looking for something to try. And my question going through life is, what happens if? And so all of my art has been exploration. When I moved to BC in '86, I was really interested in making my art with plastic and metal, casting and forming and resins. And I discovered that not many people here were that interested. So I bought myself a table saw and proceeded to refine the existing skills I had with wood. And that led into boat building and work in museums, work in galleries. And I stumbled into traditional Inuit kayaks. And I worked with a friend and eventually struck out on my own. But I'm absolutely fascinated with kayaks because they're sort of the opposite of our cultural approach to making things, to understanding how things work, and to finding solutions. I built my boats basically without a ruler. It's the boats are related to my body or to the body of the paddler, and the design isn't a set of fixed dimensions. It's a process. And you go through this process over and over and over again with different people, and you wind up with very different boats that are absolutely, obviously related and functionally beautiful. I spent many years working in traditional Inuit wooden boat building. One of the differences between traditional building or northern building and southern building, George Dyson put it really succinctly. He said, with a dugout canoe, you start with all the wood in the world, and then you remove everything until you have the bare minimum that will give you a vessel. Mm-hmm. And in the Arctic, you start with nothing and you start adding a bit here and a bit there until you have enough to give you a vessel. The approach to building stretches the available material to its limits, and in building, I encountered. I came to recognize and to articulate the fact that I believe that material has agency. Uh-huh. And years later, I was doing my MFA, reading Jane Bennett. It was like a shock of recognition. But the material that I work with, I have the skills, and people have the skills to be able to make stuff do what they want. I can make a boat, but if I work with the material, if I'm sensitive to what the material wants to do, if I'm sensitive to what it's willing to and pleased to allow to happen to it, the end result is sweeter, more beautiful, and a better boat. Stronger, faster, more efficient, more seaworthy. And, that kind of thing, you with boats, you simply look at them. If it's beautiful, it's good. Mm-hmm. What I liked about working on the water was that I could that words like fair and true and sweet are actually technical terms, and you can base your life. You can make decisions that you can trust your life to based on that romantic language and that romantic approach to assessing structure and assessing form and assessing shape. And so that was sort of my foundation for sculpture. And when I moved into my MFA, I started moving away from working with boats, working with the pre-designed, pre-planned, and pre-thought out things, and I began working with what the material wanted to do. So the one example of the photo that you have,
I want to see it again.
Sure.
If we can bring it up. There it goes. I have to say, the first time I saw this, it just did not register the intensity of this. And then I looked closer, and I think you mentioned it, Ed. Is that all balancing on a nail?
Yeah, that's for people who haven't seen it personally, it's 11 feet long, and it's light enough that you can hold it with your little finger. So it's carved out of a single piece of wood. I took pieces from one end and glued them to the other, but it all comes from one piece of wood. It's Western red cedar, and it's about the relationship between the lower part, which is weighted and has inertia and is driven by movement of the air going one way, and this tall needle at the other end that pushes in the other direction. And it's a constant discussion between the two ends. Sometimes it happens quickly. Usually it moves very, very slowly. And it's a piece that you have to sort of stop and relax and allow to happen. It has its own personality. I love it when it's outside, because when it's inside, it sort of gets pushed around by a fan and it does the weather vane thing. You know where it's going to go, you know how far it's going to tip over. But when it's outside, it reminds me of a dog that's kind of looking for something in the grass. It moves a little one way, a little the other way, bends down, sniffs a bit, changes its mind, comes back, and then, you know, it might move suddenly and then proceed slowly after that. So it really has a lifelike feel to it.
And the way you're talking about it is also like Shary, just a very, it's there's a lot of poetry in some of the words that you're saying. It's this relationship that seems lovely, but I really want to know, are there some times when you're just pulling your hair out and saying, this isn't working, trying to force a solution? Or are you that much of an expert in wood?
I have walk away from it days. Previously, and I still succumb to the urge to just make it happen, but I find that my work is better when I realize that something's not going the way that I want it to, and I step back and I let the solution happen another time or another way. Sometimes it just requires reflection. That sculpture that we were looking at, I had taken out to Coquitlam. This is the other disaster. Took it out to Coquitlam to photograph it at my school. And as I was driving home, the tip of it was sticking out of the window of my car because it's too long to go inside my little matrix. And the wind caught it, and the wind caught the tip, and it snapped like a long piece of glass in many pieces. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw half my sculpture sucked out the window onto the Lougheed Highway. So I hauled the steering wheel and pulled off onto the shoulder and jumped out and started walking back along the shoulder of the Lougheed Highway, picking splinters of wood off the shoulder. And about 100 feet along, I noticed, oh, there's a big piece out in the middle of the highway. And it was just at that instant that a car went chunk chunk over top of it. So I finally got all the pieces. And I was telling people afterwards that it was just starting to rain. It was like a movie. If a cello had been playing, I think I would have started crying. So I took all of these pieces and I brought them back to my studio and left it for a few days. And then I started putting them back together. And some of that sculpture, I think, was embedded in the tread of the tire. So there's a piece that looks like a weasel has attacked it about 3 feet from the tip. And I love it. It's got this story, it's got this personality, it's a survivor, and it is still as graceful and still has the personality that it had before. I love my work.
That's fantastic. It's a fantastic that now embedded history in that piece, a new layer of embedded history. That's amazing. Yeah, that's again, when I saw that piece, I thought, oh, that is when you were talking before about trying to release your white knuckle grip on your practice and move into that piece seemed to like epitomize somebody who has had to let go of a whole lot of skill or go beyond a lot of skill to create.
Yeah, my last 3 years have been a process because I come from design, and leaving the boat building aside, my process is generally internal. I work out the problems. I love solving problems, And then by the time I get to making something, I have a general idea how it'll go. And of course, I work with the material and that changes things, but I have a pretty clear idea of what's going to happen. And the last 3 years have been a process as you said, of releasing my white knuckle grip on controlling where the piece is going and what the viewer is going to experience. And for me, the revelation has been that the viewer brings, and it's self-evident to me now, but I didn't see it before, but everything that the viewer brings to my work is part of the work, because the interaction between my work and the viewer creates the actual piece. So really it's a three-way collaboration between myself and the material and the fabrication of whatever object is there, but then the meaning is rendered through the experience that is shaped by the experience and the knowledge and the biases and the wonder of the viewer.
Well said.
That's exciting territory to be playing in for me. No hands.
I know that I feel like there's these two streams of materialist makers. I call materialist. I always say I'm a materialist. Some that most of the making is happening internally, and then there's an output, and other ones that just can't, like myself, I have to actually be mucking around to understand what I'm doing in a big way. And that's so simplistic, but I have noticed, oh, you're one of those. I want to move on to Ed for a second. Well, we're going to come around again to everybody because there's lots to talk about. But Ed, I'm very interested in, I spend a lot of time looking through all your work. You post a lot of your work, and it goes back quite a way. So that was really a really great trip to go on, just to see your work. And I noticed that some prevailing themes, and one is that you show this references to heavy industry like mining and reverence for the tools and the relics of primary industry, massive scale machinery. When I say that we're responding to the environment, you're not skipping through the daisies, right? On your explorations of the environment. Can you talk a bit about that?
Agreed. I mean, I've had a ton of jobs in my life for sure, and I've done all kinds of industrial things, or dirty jobs, I guess, right, is what they would call it. And I'm really attracted to simpler things like shapes and materials, form and line. I'm not very good with color, I think, and so my work kind of moves towards big, bold things, and I'm a tool user, so those things kind of the line and tools really mean a lot to me. Now we're skipping through a bunch of pictures here, and this is good. I mean, I'm just moving now in my artistic career towards maybe more sculptural things, or things that I want to leave behind or make out of certain materials. Wood is a favorite, but predominantly my material or my favorite material, and it's not really a material that you can touch or something, but it's like isolation. There's this thing about being in your own head and having things that sort of come to you when you're alone. And I mean in the city this year I've been working outside, and most of the time I want to concentrate and we look to be sort of alone, but there's something about that deep isolation. So in the past couple of let's say 5 years, I've taken on a couple of really, what for me, maybe they're not epic for anybody else, but big trips, 100-kilometer hikes. In 2018, I did an 800-kilometer solo canoe trip, with the intent of making art every day on this trip, and finding the energy, the time, and then the ability to sort of take away, from the survival situation perhaps of a solo trip. But that energy there's nothing like when you're in the mountains in grizzly country, there's nothing like, can I get my watercolors out now kind of thing? Can I spread things out, or am I going to be stopped by a rainstorm, or is something going to, scarier going to happen? That energy unto itself is really, really amazing. But that isolation I find, and sort of screwing into my own head deeply, it brings me a vision, or you're right, sort of animates the things that I'm seeing and I'm really intrigued by. You know, it could be a bunch of pipes. It could be you're right, like a lot of industrial applications. I mean, these are the places, I guess, in a city. Recently moved from Alberta. These are the places where I could find that isolation. I would go down into the industrial areas and set an easel up and draw and paint down there, to get away from, I guess, everything. You know, and there's a lot of beauty in the world when you look at it, you know, without judgment, and whether it's industrial or whether it's a landscape, you know, trees, plants, and tools can be really, really beautiful things. And I see that. I mean, you know, Shary makes beautiful things with hand tools. You know, I mean, we don't see the tools in the work, but I see the hand through the tools in the work. And Robert's doing something similar. He sees the beauty in the wood, but it's still through tools and you know, and through the hand. Does that answer the question?
Oh,
Carlyn?
it's so great. You guys are just great. It's I love to let this, and I've been hearing this from people who have been tuning in, just letting this kind of information and this feedback just sort of wash over. It's a delight, you know. And I think about you in how the kinds of things you post. You might see something interesting on the ground, and you'll take that photo. But it's also the lino cuts themselves, and I wonder if actually the image of those lino cuts is sort of secondary to that whole process of working with that tool and doing the carving. I'm not sure, but it's a nice thing to wonder about, that maybe you love both of those just differently.
Yeah, the printmaking is certainly something different, you know, and cutting into lino and sometimes cutting into wood blocks, very different materials. But yeah, and then you know, the limitations of what you can do with your hands or how well you can sharpen something. I mean, there's a whole raft of skills that go into, you know, any artistic form that we never see. And so I think that for me, the plates, they reveal something in the printmaking that even the print may or may not show. But you're right, yeah, the plates, they have a special place because that mark making is so evident, you know, and we can see you know, possibly the frustration or the movement of the tools, kind of thing.
Well, when you think about some of your subject matter, you've got President Putin in there, you've got Trump, you've got the skateboarder on the syringe. And I'm thinking, when you're making that work, you're actually working out your ideas through this physical process. And I just wonder about that connection. That's why I said I was a little dark, because I also remember Rosie the dog, not dark, just a very cute.
Yeah, the print of the dog. Yeah, very much so. You know, and I've done quite a few pet portraits, and which artist really hasn't when you're trying to make ends meet. But insofar as COVID and the pandemic, for me, that was kind of a scary time. I mean, I got to Vancouver right at the beginning of lockdown. Like literally, I moved to Vancouver February 28th, 2020. You know, March 16th, it's like, you know, kiss Vancouver goodbye. It turned into a ghost town. And then, you know, so not only is that isolation, I mean, how do I make friends, or how do I get to know a city that's really not, you know, doesn't want to socialize when there's a pandemic going on, but how do I deal with the fears that I have that go along with this pandemic? And for me, that's really, really real. So I guess I kind of mock it by having a little kid COVID riding the skateboard. Kid COVID's got tricks. And you know, when the vaccine was coming out, or when people were sort of debating about whether a vaccine's going to do it, yeah, the kid COVID riding the syringe on a wave, saying trepanation, dude. I mean, which is kind of a little, I mean, trepanation, I mean, we all know that has nothing to do with COVID, but it sounded pretty funny to me, trepanation. Anyways, so yes, COVID took on a personality where there was King COVID, and lots of skulls kind of came forward during the pandemic, because it was scary, and it is serious, and it's very real for me. And I guess mocking it in a way, or finding humor in it, is how we get through those things.
Definitely. I also noticed that I'm imagining, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that when you did land here and there was nothing going on, and everybody was sort of isolated, so you are still traversing the territory, and right around your studio is the ports and ongoing construction sites, maybe frozen for the moment when you first arrived. And I was just really struck by how accepting you are for all the elements of the city. Whereas so many people, it's like, oh, Vancouver, it's nice, except for too bad about, all this or all that. But you seem to embrace it all.
Well, good. I mean, I found it a little bit shocking to begin with as well. I mean, Hastings is a tough street to walk up and down, that's for sure. And I mean, it's a nation's shame there for sure. But you kind of have to take everything. You don't really have a choice about, where you get to live sometimes or what you get to see. I mean, that's for people in luxury cars and parkades and high-rise condos. For the rest of us who are artists, I guess, down here in East Van, yeah, you take what you get.
Yeah, and I guess that's maybe getting back to Shary on this, when we're talking about those giant muscles or those, these large forms, it's almost like just, as artists, we're not here to make pretty, we're here to, make conversation and lots of times to just start conversation or be a part of a conversation. And I think that I feel like those muscles and your some other of those larger scale seaside works is about maybe grappling with some of those bigger themes that they're not very comfortable. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Expand a little bit more on that? Yeah, there you go.
There you go. I was just thinking of that one, actually. So this is an oversized oyster shell. And I think there may be some pictures of the other side of it. The inside of it is really beautiful and smooth and, that kind of pearlescent interior that draws you into an oyster shell. And the other side, of course, is really rough and gray and quite ugly, honestly. And for me, this was a really spiritual work because it's kind of like being human. We have this really beautiful side to us that's shiny and reflective and full of beauty. And then we have these not so beautiful sides to us. And life for me in part is kind of trying to bring those two together and to care for and cherish the other side of myself or of life, the things that aren't as easy. And so, I mean, it's interesting just looking at this picture here and seeing how, it makes me think of that's where the light gets in, that famous Leonard Cohen line, that it's somehow working with those materials helps me to think through the meaning of them. And I come to understand often the meaning of a piece in the working with it. And I had an interesting discussion with my husband who said, well, you should plan all of this in advance. Like, don't you know in advance what you're doing? And that's a little bit false to apply meaning to it after it's done. But for me, it's the working with it that I start to understand the meaning. And sometimes an image or a shape will come up and I'll have no idea what it means. And it's sometimes months down the line that comes to me. That picture that you showed earlier, the one that looks to me kind of like a dragon. It has a green section at the bottom, Laura, and then it kind of grows out of it. And I didn't understand what that picture was about. And actually that was a great example of one. Nope, the other one that you showed very, very first. It's kind of like an animal coming up. But it was a tough one, and it had that painting was tough to make, and it has layers and layers and layers upon it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
That bottom part is thick with layers. The person who bought this told me she loved it because it looked like a mood ring at the bottom. And I didn't understand what this weird painting was about. And then I realized over time and through the whole COVID pandemic that it was kind of rising like a phoenix. And it was again getting back to that same theme of the lotus flowers, that out of this difficult turmoil, we can rise again. So I guess that through these artworks and through using natural materials and modeling, if you will, or being inspired, I suppose, by nature, I come to understand more deep things that I struggle with spiritually, or just in terms of life and the difficult journey. You know, life is joyful and wonderful, and it's also challenging sometimes. And art is for me a way to work through some of that and just quietly. I mean, Robert was talking about that processing quietly. I process more, like you were saying, Carlyn, through my hands, but while I'm working with my hands, I'm deeply thinking about things. And it's probably, being one of those people that's always busy doing things, it's one of the times when I can be quiet and silent and just understand, come to understand some of the things about life. Yeah. So.
And on the mask lotus work, what's the title of that work?
Well, that one that the picture was of is called Blue Lotus. There may be another one, another picture that's the shape is different, and that the other one is called Metamorphosis. I'm not sure if Laura has that one as well, but it's the one that's currently on view at Alternative Creations Gallery, and they're more. The Blue Lotus are 4 masks that are opposed to one another, and the Metamorphosis are more shaped like this, and they look, when they're together, they look almost like a flock of birds that are about to take off, or sometimes they look a little bit like butterflies. And again, it's that same theme of taking something difficult, the heavy symbolism of these masks, and creating something beautiful with them. So,
I know that everybody is sick of seeing those masks in the street, and
yes,
it's like, oh, one day they're going to do a big archaeological dig, and they'll dig down to this era, and it'll just be one blue striation of masks. But yeah, you managed to absolutely pull it off, so it's this big surprise. But at what point did you just come up with that, I guess? And what were you doing at the time? Like, were you in lockdown?
Yes, I was. I think it began because of those masks that I saw on the ground, and I found them very disturbing on the ground. And when I started doing research on the masks, I realized that the people that were making those masks are generally in other countries that are not so rich, and there are people that are not so rich, and they're in poorly paying jobs. And I'm suspecting, having seen some of those factories in certain countries, that they're not very clean breathing environments. I suspect they're quite toxic for the people making them. So again, I was thinking about all of this garbage, and I wonder sometimes about the alcohol that we're cleaning our hands all the time. Like, what's the long-term effect of that environmentally? So, but as I said, as a joke earlier, as an artist who works with Encaustic, I'm always thinking, well, what will that be like if it's got wax on it? And wax renders things almost translucent. There it is, beautiful. So you can see how the light gets caught, and that's something that fascinates me with art and nature, is the light. And as I was setting up this installation for the surfacing show that the Culture Crawl has hosted, I realized, as I was trying to light it, that when it gets lit properly, it casts these huge flowers or birds or butterflies against the wall. And I started playing with my cell phone light and moving it around it, and these birds were kind of taking off. And I feel like there's a lot of possibility in using this material further, but it is challenging with the wax. It's challenging to get. I have boxes full of of failures, I must say, but don't tell anybody, it's a secret.
Yeah.
These are the winners that came.
The
through.
rest are the learning moments.
They are, yes.
Yeah, there's
Yes.
no failure.
Exactly.
Yeah, so again, getting back to that Jane Bennett idea of taking something so abject and giving it and finding the agency, or seeing that it holds the potential for something inanimate to be very animated. Yeah, I often think, and maybe you feel like this too, when you pick up this material and you have this connection to it and you think, what do you want of me?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
I'm thinking about that specifically with you, Robert, with when you're talking about, I don't know if I'm speaking of that specific piece of wood that was your master's thesis, but what do you use abject material, throwaways, things that are discarded, or do you search out for the best material to work with?
I do both. I think both objects and materials have agency. And one of my favorite pieces is I was walking down an alley behind a church, and they had demolished a pipe organ. And I found this little bellows about that big with a stick coming off of it, and the stop, which was a circle of felt. And it's this little leather and wood, incredibly beautiful thing that made music that people listened to and worshiped to. And it has something. It's falling apart, but I rescued it. Someday it will be part of something. It hasn't found a place yet, but it's an object that that needs to be acknowledged. I lucked into a very large chunk of mammoth ivory at a garage sale. Once again, you know, I'm not going to make a pair of dice out of it, and this is a resource that will last well past my passing, because I just can't find the things that are respectful enough to do with it. I've found I've done a couple of small pieces of jewelry. But I can also be walking along in Home Depot and see a 2x4 that has got a bird's eye texture to it in the grain that most people would walk by. But I see it, I pull it out, and you know, it's a 2x4. It's like Kleenex. And yet there's something about it that calls out to me and says, find something to do. One of my resources at the moment is I was asked if I'd like some pews. So there was a church in Kerrisdale that I went to, not as a parishioner, but I went and they had 11 church pews. Well, to sort of search back in the history, and that's, well, number one, it's face grain white oak, which is gorgeous material. It's been aging indoors for well over 100 years. It started in the prairies and wound up here as pews. And so, you know, I've been carefully breaking it down, turning it back from pews into lumber, and then figuring out what can I do with this stuff that's going to be worthy of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, this is the other thing about materialist makers is their collections. They have to collect everything as, well, not everything, but you see the potential in things, whether they're realized or not. Most have a pretty good collection. I've discovered you could tell a materialist artist.
I think that most people share that attitude. I've worked in museums, and nobody would say, you know, that shoe's not important, it's just a shoe. Well, it was the shoe of, say it was the shoe of George Vancouver. Well, it's important just because of its connection with something, or it's important because it's intrinsically important. Museums are full of those things. You know, you don't go into a museum and say, well, we don't need this anymore. It's, you know, this is just a pen. Or this is whatever, and the world around us is full of those things as well. that that have importance and have meaning. And when we treat everything as throwaway, I think we by stopping, by not respecting the importance of the things around us, we stop respecting ourselves.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely well said. Ed, I know you've moved from Edmonton recently, but did you or do you collect things?
I had to get rid of a lot of stuff when I moved from Edmonton. I had to admit, I had to downsize. I've started collecting, things around Vancouver again. I have a little box on the go here, and I have a couple of future projects, in my mind, I guess. I mean, maybe as the winter grows on and things start getting even rainier than they are, I'll come back to that post culture crawl. But yeah, collecting certainly. I mean, as Robert said, detritus or almost garbage, a rusty washer can be just as exciting as a poppy husk per se. There is beauty in many things, but as Robert says, you really got to be open to it, and you don't have to look for it, but you have to be ready for it. You have to sort of have that ability to allow something to be itself. It can't just be what you think it is, or be judging all the time about why this is here or what it's doing. Yeah, I got stuff. Yeah, I got stuff.
And so I want to ask you this, Ed, this is like really just throwing this at you.
Okay.
What would you do with your practice if you knew you couldn't fail?
What would I do? I
Because
guess the
you were
same stuff
talking-
I'm doing now, because I mean, there is no such thing as failure. If you do it, you're kind of winning. I mean, it's the same thing as going to the gym. Oh, I went to the gym and all I did was sort of look at the weights, and then I was like, oh, that's really going to hurt me tomorrow. So I turned around and I came home. But you still went. I mean, you still went to the gym. I mean, you're building that routine. So you tried a watercolor and it was a flop, or you tried something and nobody liked it, whatever. You still got something out of it. You did something, that you took a chance on, and that trust in yourself and in that process, that's a success unto itself. Could I ever fail? I mean, yeah, that's great. Failure is great.
Yeah, that's spoken like a true artist, I must say. So we're rounding out to the end of the talk. It's been very interesting, illuminating. Can we just go around and talk a little bit about what you are, if you're open, and where you're open, and what you're during the crawl? Can you start, Ed?
Sure. I'm down here in Chinatown at a place called the Sun Hua Center. I'm up on the 3rd floor. Got a small little kind of concrete studio here, and yeah, lots of paintings, drawings, watercolor. Come on by, take a look.
And what days are you open?
Oh, any day that the culture crawl's open, I'm here. I'm always open.
Okay, that's great. And I think we're not. Some days are appointment only. I didn't quite catch this from last.
Yeah, Friday, Saturday, Sunday are appointments, and it's by the building, not by the artist, as I learned. Thanks, Jody Ponto. It's by the building, so you'll go to the Culture Crawl website. You'll look at a map, and you can sort of pick out your route or where it's close to home. So pick by building, and then I would be cautious though. Look inside the building. This is in a digital way, and look at each artist, because sort of over on the right-hand side of their profile page, it will say there whether they're open or not, both weekends or when they're open. Other than that, for some reason, I don't think you can see it anywhere else until you drill down into the artist profile. So take a look and make sure that, in my building, there's 10 artists, but this weekend, there are only 3 of them are available. Next weekend in the free-for-all, sort of the festival seating, then they're all open at that point.
Okay, good tip. Shary?
I think it's important to add too that they'll be checking vaccine passports at the door, and you need to wear your mask. So we've talked a lot about masks tonight, but those 2 things are happening as well. So I'm at 1000 Parker Street, and I'm up on the 4th floor in studio number 435. And so we're encouraging people to go up to the top of the building first and then work your way down. And again, same thing as Ed was saying, some of the studios are open and some of the for the first weekend. But again, the whole building is open, and I will be there for the whole time. So that would be Friday night from 6, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 5 or 6 to 10.
Yeah.
Anybody remember? What is it, 5 or 6?
I think it's fine.
Oh, 6 to 10, it said, 5
6
to
to
10.
5 to
5 to
10.
10. So, okay, 5 to 10. Thanks, Esther. 5 to 10 on Friday, 12 to 6 on Saturday, and 12 to 6 on Sunday. And then the same thing the following week, except that it includes 11 to 6. Thank you. Okay, better look at the website. But basically, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at certain times. And then the following week, Thursday night, Friday night, and then Saturday and Sunday.
Bring your vaccine passport, wear your mask. And Robert.
Yes, I will be working this weekend. I've lucked into some bronze wire, and I really need to do some stuff. And I
Nice
feel really
material.
lucky for that. Bronze wire, I mean, can you imagine? I thought I was going to have to make bronze and then draw it out and make wire. So I'm a lucky guy. Next weekend, what is it, the 18th, 19th, 20th? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, anyway, I will be there at Parker, sorry, not Parker, that's my old address. I'll be at Maker Lab, 2525, no, corner of Hawks and Cordova.
Right.
Maker Labs.
Maker Labs.
And I will be in the loading bay on the main floor. So you come in and I'll be pretty much directly ahead and to your left as you come in. So I'm one of the first stops. I need a big space because my stuff is big.
Sounds like a reason to check you out for sure. Okay, we got to wrap this up. We're over time, but I want to thank you all for taking part in this year's Talking Arts series. And so good luck with the crawl.
Cool.
Thank
Thanks.
you. And thanks to the Crawl folks for your hard work. It's amazing.
It's been
gonna
wonderful.
be wonderful. And all the artists who work so hard. And it's always inspiring to go and see everything. So thank you all, but especially to the Crawl staff. And thanks, Carlyn. And check out her work. It's beautiful as well.
Cool.
Thank you. Have fun, you guys.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.